the regular decorum between the police and and the citizens of Mount Vernon. A shared vision, if you will. Going in the subsections, um, some of our recommendations need to be trained on how to engage with community members without using force and antagonism, especially understanding that they don't work in the toy department. You're going to have to de-escalate a lot of situations and just ultimately understand that when you first engage with the public, you might be setting up somebody else within the department to later on have a interaction with them, and you don't want to start off on a negative note. MVPD should be trained in crisis intervention team training, gain knowledge and skills, especially that de-escalation piece, and not escalate issues for no reason, or at least not good reasons. Focus on officer safety and wellness. I think if we focus on the safety and wellness of the Mount Vernon Police Department and get them in a better mood through these interactions, we could address some of the just the basic principles, the basic decorum, put them in a situation where they could deal with some of the bigger challenges that we're having, financial and otherwise, that may be a little bit easier to cope with if the decorum both ways is more positive. Scrolling down, shift hours, overall mental health, bunch of check-ins, highlighting positive police actions, especially PBA, some of those sports programs and interactions between police officers and the public, get them out of the cars and walking the streets like they had been for a brief time during the summer would also be an awesome thing. More customer service oriented. They need to be trained on how to respond positively and effectively to complaints from citizens, especially not to internalize the complaints. Again, just because we're going through a tough time doesn't mean that you can't understand that the person's going through the tough time. It has nothing to do with you, and kind of, work on those de-escalation techniques, and treat each encounter as it is the first with the individuals. That's also like, oh, here we go again, or repeated incidents with the same person. Not a really good way to give everybody another chance, a fresh setting. That's pretty much it.
Any thoughts? So this is when we want to open it up to the group. Are there any thoughts, any feedback on their recommendations?
Hi, it's Anika. Sorry, I wasn't sure what group or what pillar this presentation was on.
Yeah, it's the building confidence and sustainability subcommittee.
And just for clarification, what's the difference between building confidence and sustainability committee and the building trust and legitimacy committee?
It's the building confidence and stability is building confidence in the they kind of overlap, honestly, right? So building confidence within the community, as well as stability with police officer interactions. Mm-hmm. And the building trust is also similar to the confidence aspect,
right?
But it's like, now we trust these police officers. We believe they're one with us. And legitimacy is similar, so they have similar things. I think they approach them from different standpoints. Amy and David were able to throw in some of the mental health aspects that we were concerned about when we originally started the commission. And I think the other group took a different approach to just community-based interactions in general.
Okay.
Any thoughts on their recommendations? And so we really love input from the entire commission, because this is, like we said, it's crunch time, right? So want to get as much thoughts as possible so that we can start to flesh out and finalize some of the recommendations. So I think there were quality recommendations, and some of the recommendations, like the survey, came from a different group. I know Axel, and policy and oversight spoke about having some surveys and including them on the results on the website and things like that. So any other recommendations or additions, anything?
So I would like to make a recommendation around the number of times that people are surveyed, because I think people can get survey fatigue. One, it takes a lot of energy to design and administer a survey, and then we're actually wearing down people when we ask 4 times a year for a response. So I would think somewhere around 1 to 2 times a year, somewhere like maybe Q1 and Q3, like in the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, just gives you a good sense of where it is, because you don't get enough. And the reason behind that is it's one thing to get the survey and it's enough to get the data. The next thing is, what do you do with it? So you're not giving enough time for a corrective action to be put in place and then to be implemented. So I actually think 2 times is a stretch, but 1 to 2 times I think should be the max. That's just sort of
That,
my
that's
recommendation.
a good point. Our thinking on it was that it was more of taking the temperature and getting a status check on how the mission and the vision is being accomplished, rather than kind of starting from scratch with a brand new survey, every single time. So it's still, it should kind of be just a check-in, like well, how much progress have we made? And if everybody in the community is on the same page, that the department's vision and mission is being worked toward, that check-in shouldn't be really that tedious. It should be more of a, hey, we agree that this is what we're going to do. Have we taken more steps going toward that goal, or has something come up that has taken us away from that goal?
Any other thoughts? Do folks agree with reducing the amount to 1 or 2, or trying to get more input from people who typically don't speak? So would love for someone to chime in.
So this is Amy. I think that's fine. I agree. We kind of were 1 to 2 is fine. I don't know if also, and this might be a lot of work, we want to make sure that some of the questions in the survey are directly related to some of the goals that we have in our plan also.
Okay.
I would like to think that the survey questions that we had, and Anika will go into it, I hope later on, about the survey. I went through it in detail, and I think we can use it as a baseline to constantly massage the questions so that we're listening to what the community is saying, but using the initial survey and also feedback to continue to guide the questions. And it does give us like, okay, this is where we are, to this is where we want to be. But just making sure they fall in line with the themes that we decide as a result of this recommendation, whatever they may be, whatever the thrusts are that we decide as a commission are going to be sort of the outlines of this proposal, should be the same themes that we carry out in the surveys when we ask them, however many times we ask them, which I would suggest would be no more than twice a year, but I think they should still follow the same theme.
Yeah, what she said, exactly.
Is there times in which during the year that there'd be more interactions or less interactions based on, let's say, the weather or other factors?
I'm sorry, David, I didn't hear you. Would you mind repeating?
Are there certain times of the year where there are more interactions, like let's say the summertime when everybody is outside and irritable and such, or are there certain times in which those interactions are less often because it's the winter and there's 1.5 feet of snow outside? So maybe like the survey shouldn't be like spread out evenly. Maybe there's certain points in which the feedback would be more valuable, so to speak. I don't know.
DC Lack, and I defer to you on that, as far as the interactions.
I would say we don't want to do it around Christmas because people are distracted. So around the holiday season, I think might be a challenge and too burdensome, and we might see low responses, although we did initiate our survey around the holiday season. So I don't know if that's just because it was new and it was attractive, but if we were doing it often, whether or not we would again see survey fatigue. It is a very real thing. And if it's another survey, we want people to value it and look forward to answering it. And I also think the summertime is a different appeal because crime looks different in the winter as opposed to the summer. And so people will have a different feel, and our patrols and everything will look very different as well. I see DC Morales is on the phone, so he may have some thoughts, but our crime patterns and even our patrol patterns will look different. So I think the position and perspective that the community has in their relationship and engagement with the police will differ between winter and summer. So for us to have a survey that follows those seasons would be ideal, in my opinion.
How about some thoughts around the training? They mentioned some of the training and increase in training. So is everyone on board with that? Increase in training around implicit bias training, etc. So I know we have the PBA contract issue, but what is everyone's thoughts around increasing training?
Well, we also touched on training in
Okay.
our recruitment and retention as well, and the police department does have a lot of different trainings that are probably already mentioned as recommendations. So, I think we may have to either word it to continue with this, or if we can all, if there is any type of order or any type of outline of these trainings, if we could review it as well to see if there needs to be any other further recommendations that we can follow up even past the date where this gets presented, if we continue as a committee, as a follow-up committee.
Okay.
And this is Amy. I don't know if this is appropriate in this or, but along with training, and again, I'm the mental health provider in the group here, is also perhaps access to supports for the police, like individualized mental health support that would be destigmatized and not seen as weak or negative. I don't know if that fits into the very loose criteria of this group, but that's another idea.
Okay. Yeah, so I know there were a few recommendations around officer wellness. So we consolidated to include employee wellness, I forget what it was, an employee assistance program. So all the wellness things that are included under that bullet point. So that's a good point, Amy. So we want to flesh that out, I think, under that bullet point. Any additional thoughts on this committee's report?
Hi, I got a thought, Mom. This is Wade Hardy. I was on the call last week. I'm the Vice President of Westchester Rockland Guardians Association. I also work in the DA's office, and officer wellness is definitely a highly recommended. Before 2019, the most talked about issue in policing was police suicides. So, and I'm sure in 2020 those numbers probably did not decrease; they probably increased. But because of everything else going on, no one's talking about police suicide anymore. So that was, as the Guardians, one of the things we were discussing heavily and involved with was, getting help for police officers. So I would definitely highly recommend that. And also the training regarding procedural justice, that's also, I stand behind that, because when you deal with people on the street and you explain to them why you're doing what you're doing, sometimes it makes the incident go a lot more smoother. So if you tell somebody, listen, I'm stopping you because there was a situation where there was a burglary, the person who ran out the house had a green jacket on, a red hat and blue jeans, and you're wearing a green jacket, red hat, and blue jeans, that's why you stop. Instead of just saying, hey, you fit the description, give more details, explain the procedure, explain the process. So that's, that's also a good, request to have.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. All right, do we want to move on to the Building Trust and Legitimacy group?
Black History Month, everyone. I don't think we said any of that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that because it is extremely important. This month is. So good evening. I was the one, I prepared the outline. I believe Mr. Rose is on here. I don't know if Mr. Terry is on here and Miss Tyree.
Yes, I'm here.
You are here? Okay, I didn't see you. Mr. Terry has stated that, you know, he agreed with the outline. I haven't heard anything else. However, I will insert the outline into the Google Drive, but I'll go through it. I had sent it out back on January the 14th.
Yeah.
I
So
didn't receive it.
it's in the Google Drive now.
Okay. All right.
What we're hoping to do is like add some more content to it, just flesh them out a little bit more. But yes, outline is good. We just need to have it fleshed out a little bit more. So you want me to pull it up on the screen so that
That's fine. That's fine.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right, I'll make it bigger, hopefully.
Even though I have it right in front of me as well. So thank you so much. So building trust and legitimacy, that's our subcommittee. Basically, we set the standard by interacting with the community. Honesty between the police officers and the community is a start. We took a lot of this upon ourselves, meaning the community, that we would, I hate to say offer an olive branch, but that we would do that because oftentimes the police don't come from the community, so they do not know the community. But we believe that the police, they need to walk the streets in the community. It's extremely important for the community and police to know each other. The officers need to be seen and not just sit in their vehicles, but walk. And I know they'll do that in certain communities, but not other communities. Officers usually come out when a community is in crisis. But this should not be the first time that the community, and that's a typo, and police get to know each other. For example, officers should walk block by block. Oftentimes there's interagency relationships. Oftentimes the Mount Vernon police and the feds, whether it be the ATF, DEA, they oftentimes work together. And the community may not necessarily know those officers of the federal agency. And then when something occurs, the Mount Vernon Police Department is blamed for it. So it's a good idea if the known Mount Vernon Police Department officers, they work to decrease the level of issues. Also, how can the community and police get to know each other? Communication is the key. We discussed the fact that police should come from the community. Oftentimes the community makes a statement that, well, you know what, there are no officers in the Mount Vernon Police Department who come from the community. And I can honestly say, I believe that is an issue. I think, well, we thought that it should really start in high schools, introducing this career. It's just not a job, it's a career to the community, because you just can't complain and say, well, we don't have anyone. It's a legitimate profession. There need to be events and programs. Mr. Terry explained that when he was younger, there was the Police Athletic League. Is it possible to reestablish that league? Community events build trust. Know your rights forms. Many police officers have been involved in those events, and those are great events. They take place at churches as well as community centers. And the community will continue to invite the police to community events. The reform begins with us. Should the police not respond, we will continue. And then if they continue not to respond, which I honestly, I believe that someone will respond, and then there will be a better relationship between the police and the community. I think that's.
All right, thank you. So some of, I think, you know, you have some great ideas right in there. I think one of the things that I saw in the outline, the report, the main document, was starting a, maybe developing some kind of curriculum that, you know, could be shared with Mount Vernon High School and maybe Westchester County, Westchester Community College, some type of curriculum where you start to collaborate to develop a pipeline into the police department. So that's, you know, that's in alignment with, you know, making people in the community more aware and getting some of our own people from the community into it. So I think that's a recommendation that can, you know, that can be consolidated. as well. I see Mr. Hardy, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I mean, on that same topic, I'm on the White Plains Police Reform Committee, and I spoke to the White Plains Superintendent of Schools. And next school year, they're looking at creating a course on systemic racism in policing. And in that course, it's going to be a high school course, probably in social studies, in the social studies field. Students will be taught about the history of policing in the United States and how systemic racism played a part in policing. But a challenge to the students will be to come up with ways to improve police and community relations, improve the way policing is done in America. And also part of the White Plains Police Reform Committee is anybody who passes that course can take the police exam without paying a fee for the exam. So this is one way to try to get more students to not only consider careers in law enforcement, but the exam is given every 4 years. So you take the exam as a senior in high school, you go to college, come home, you can become a police officer, or you can go join the FBI, Secret Service, whatever. But just giving, and you're going to have the right people becoming police officers, because these students went through the course. They know the history of policing. They know how it involves systemic racism. They come up with ideas of how to improve it, and they realize the effect it had on people of color. Now they're going to become police officers. Now they can put their thoughts into action. So if anybody if you want to reach out to the Mount Vernon Superintendent of Schools, he can contact Joe Ricker, the White Plains Superintendent of Schools. He has his staff reviewing this for curriculum for 2021-22 school year.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy.
You're welcome.
Any additional thoughts?
This is Joanne Dunn, and Tamika, I owe you a phone call because you did reach out to me. I know I was out, but I think, Tamika reaching out to me was also, it brings up this question of how do you bridge community with, I guess, quote unquote, justice involved folks as well, right? Because I think about my young people who are justice involved youth who already have this preconceived notion of cops, right? And so how do we bridge community there with them? And then also when you think about the folks on take third and third, we need to bridge community with them too. And so I don't know how that is or what we can do, but I think that if there's a way, I love the idea of, bringing it into the classroom and learning about it, but then there's a group of folks that are missing. And so, I guess this notion of how do we do that? I don't know the answer, but Tamika, that first step about reaching out to me and getting justice involved youth to kind of bridge community with the cops and to learn and know that they're not the enemy. They're just they're an enforcement. I mean, if there's a way to do more of that, I would love to.
So Joanne, this is Amy, and it's where I'm right with you, because I was really thinking of our WIOA out of school youth that really need that. First of all, they themselves need to build better relationships with the police. And for some of them, it could be a career path. And it's one that because of maybe their former experiences with the police, they don't consider, but it's something that if we could turn it around. So we had a nice call with Vincent to talk about the Explorers Club that used to exist in Mount Vernon. And we're going to try and see if somehow under our WIOA, and we would of course would be great to work with you in any way to develop it, as what does it look like for these youth? What is the unique curriculum that they need and the steps?
So I think it's that brings me to a point someone mentioned. I think it's important that we can make proposals, even if we don't exactly have the how to do it, right? We don't have to have every step to give an idea, to make a recommendation. So I want you all to think about that when we make the recommendations, right? So it doesn't have to be fleshed out completely. You can leave room for the police department to develop it or figure out the best way to develop it as well.
I absolutely love the part about the police officers getting out of the cars and not driving around in such a. I have two brothers that are military, one in the Navy, one in the Army. And the one's in the Army, he did a couple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. And when he tells his stories of driving down Fallujah or whatever the heck it is, a lot of his stories about the way that he engaged with the public is very similar to the way that some of our officers speak about patrolling South Mount Vernon. Just a very militaristic attitude, and it creates a very hostile tension. And I just don't understand. Well, I do understand, but the police department seems to not understand why a certain section of the public, even in Mount Vernon, feels the way that they do about them. It's just very little self-reflection, I should say.
Coach D?
Yeah, the part I loved was the PAL, obviously for as a coach, selfish reasons. No, but I just think that the city of Mount Vernon having coached with Mount Vernon High School. I've said this before. It always amazed me where our politicians always want to take pictures with us whenever we went to Glen Falls or we won a championship, but when it came to actually getting them to do something for the youth, it always was like pulling teeth. And so the PAL is something I'm really looking forward to seeing that expand. I think there's a lot of room to expand the PAL on a lot of different sports for both genders. And I think that could play a huge role in terms of bettering relationships with the kids, because actually it's going to be the kids that ultimately is going to bring this change that we're trying to do. They're the ones that are going to be the beneficiaries of any reform that is adopted here. And so, and the PAL and the Explorers Club is a great place to start.
Any other thoughts? All right. Are we ready to move on to recruiting and supporting personnel?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Let me try to pull up. Anika, do you know which? Never mind, found it.
All right, so I'll start off, and then Anika, if you want to talk about some of the things that you had added in here, just jump right in. So recruitment, retention, and training. Recruitment and retention. Our biggest thing is retention. The recruitment part, we're all, if you're not aware, Mount Vernon does take Mount Vernon residents first. But one thing we want to focus on is preparing our Mount Vernon residents to become police officers and helping them achieve their goal of becoming police officers. And one of the things is we would like for the police department or the city to provide a free training course before the police exams to help prepare the officer, help prepare them to take the test. One of the things that Anika has researched, and I think it was actually spoken on here, and I know there are some high schools that do have some sort of criminal justice programs within the high school. But she said they offer the civil service examination at no cost to high school graduates who pass the elective police officer law enforcement curriculum taught over 2 quarters or 1 semester in their senior year. And she has a link for Youth for Life, Ready for Life program. And I don't know if Anika, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. Happy Black History Month, as Tamika already shouted out. Wade was on a call a couple weeks back with Westpac that Dwayne, Mary, and myself were also on. So hearing him talk about, was it ABLE, Wade? Was that the name of the program? I can't remember.
Yes, I was going to actually pronounce, Active Bystandership and Law Enforcement. ABLE. It's free and it's given by what's the law school? It'll come to me, but it's free to all law enforcement.
It's Georgetown Law School.
Exactly, Georgetown Law School. And these MasterCard, which is based in Westchester, they're one of the funders of ABLE. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. So hearing Wade talk about ABLE really inspired me, and it felt like it was something that we can scale for Mount Vernon for sure. So as he mentioned, offering high school seniors the opportunity to learn about law enforcement, criminal justice, and then offering them a waiver or free admission to the civil service test. And, you know, I know there may be some issues with the budget. I know we always talk about how tight money is in Mount Vernon. So if this can't be enforced through the Workforce Investment Act, that it could possibly be worked into the Youth for Life or Ready for Life program, which is already existing in Mount Vernon. The Youth for Life, Ready for Life program received a nearly $4 million federal grant. So if there's a way that we can improve job seeker and employer outcomes by connecting with these high school students, I think that'll be a great place to start. Vinny also touched on the Police Explorers program. Some of you guys have mentioned it earlier in the conversation. Amy, you spoke to Vinny, so you're fully aware of the Explorers program. Vinny, I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just real quick, the Explorers program is a division of Learning for Life, which is a section of the Boy Scouts of America. This is something I found out looking back into the program that I wasn't aware of. It's designed to expose young men and women ages 14 to 21 to the vast career choices. So it's not just for law enforcement. The fire department could have an Explore program, recreate, whatever, any type of field that you want to aim it toward and geared it toward. They could have an Explorer program. Ours would be geared towards law enforcement. But it's not just law enforcement. It's to teach, life learning skills and how to advance in any career and entering any career. But a lot of it will be geared to law enforcement, and they would get the full exposure of everything that the police officers deal with, their training, and so on. And I think it would be awesome if Mount Vernon had it, and hopefully it would lead to some of our young kids exploring. Possibly becoming police officers, or at least go to college for criminal justice and possibly pursue some sort of law enforcement career. One of the other things that we discussed was the Mount Vernon Police Department that would, if they don't create a recruitment policy based on some of these recommendations and how we can get our Mount Vernon residents to become police officers and well-trained and so on, and kind of focus towards that and create a recruiting unit that will concentrate on recruiting, because I know right now the guys who do recruitment do so much more than just recruiting, and I think that would definitely help assist the police department to attain their goals with the officers that we want here in Mount Vernon. We're talking about the psychological exams. I believe we mentioned it in other meetings. We recommend that there be a view of the current exam and the parties who give this exam to ensure that there is no bias towards culture in Mount Vernon and ethnicities and so on, and just make sure that some of our officers aren't being turned down because of the bias within the psychological program. Mm-hmm. And we go on to retention. These recommendations came from officers that were interviewed by some of the committee members. And these are, a lot of these things are contractual things, as we know, but these are some of the things that the officers were talking about. And we were talking about, I don't know, Anika, you want to talk about some of this? I know we talk about college tuitions and reimbursements and so on. And
So in an effort to improve retention, I broke it down in a couple different categories. This is also being worked on, so a lot of this, some of this will change. But improve officer wellness initiative. So we talked about already mental health and how important it is to officer wellness and destigmatizing mental health or mental wellness and offering more resources. So one of the first recommendations that we made here was not only should there be a baseline when officers are, hired and given the position, but that there should be continued opportunity for psychological screening. Annually is the recommendation, as Mary mentioned and David mentioned in their presentation, that there should be some sort of, designated person, whether it's a social worker or someone on staff, on payroll to assist these officers, if, as far as mental health is concerned and officer wellness is concerned in that regard. Moving on, we also touched on for retention, annual assessment and promotional processes so that there be an improvement in those areas as well. So that one of the annual assessment recommendations we made was that officers are actually able to submit a personal assessment of their work performance, and that their personal assessment will be reviewed alongside the manager's evaluation. And what this does is incentivize officers to, excel in their roles, and promotes a culture of employee engagement. Another recommendation for annual assessment and promotional processes is set eligibility policies for when an officer would be qualified to be promoted. So I think one of the things that Vinny touched on was that some officers are being promoted with little experience or are given supervisory roles or mentorship roles, and they're really inexperienced. So that there be eligibility requirements around that to prevent inexperienced officers from teaching other inexperienced officers, and then the problem just perpetuates.
Yeah, if I could just step in, that focuses on a lot with our field training officers, because right now, due to the fact that we can't retain our officers, we have young officers training even younger officers, and we spoke about that at other meetings. So that's what a lot of that is geared towards our field training officers and officers that are moving up within the detective division. There needs to be some sort of assessment to see where they lack and where they can help out, because right now they go up to the detective division, they get assigned to a detective, an experienced detective, and they learn on hand. So thank you, Nick. You can go on.
No, thank you. Yeah. We touched on improving compensation and benefits. So one of the key points here is professional development for these officers, offering them an educational development. So offering them either tuition reimbursement or partnering with local colleges to offer employees the opportunity to return to school after 6 to 8 months of joining the force. So after 6 to 8 months of joining, or whatever that policy looks like that's best suited for the MVPD, that they can offer officers the opportunity to go back to school, reimburse them for that, and that the terms include that the officer must remain employed with the department for up to a certain number of years after graduation, right? So that also in turn improves your retention rate. You incentivize these officers to stay, and then you allow them to stay up to a certain number of years after graduation. Kathy had spoken to a couple of officers who had given her some information about their tours. She's not here tonight, Kathy, to speak on these things, but I guess the tour length was an issue. So that was something that was brought up. Increased pay, of course, officers are asking for increased pay. They're leaving out on this, municipality to go to other jurisdictions because they get paid more, and that the resources are better in these other jurisdictions as well. So there's definitely room for improvement there. Assessing the police contract and overall better benefits as far as retirement and health insurance goes. And these recommendations for retention continue. They'll be in the drive, so I don't want to, go in too much. And then we have training recommendations as well. So there's general recommendations for all MVPD employees, which is continue yearly crisis intervention training, procedural justice training, implicit bias training, which Vinny had, contributed to this document. He had brought his expertise in on that. So we understand that that's still happening, and we just ask that it be continued, and that there be an improvement for the training for onboarding employees. So, that the trainings are done not by paramilitary focused organizations, but instead organizations that provide a curriculum rooted in advocacy, cultural competency, and behavioral tactics. So for example, Neighbors Link is an organization really centered around undocumented individuals, and that they provide a training or curriculum on immigration and undocumented residents, so that officers are getting, a well-rounded, culturally competent training on these topics. And it continues, same with the LGBTQ community, anti-racist training. I made a recommendation here that there be an assessment first, so officers can really test their baseline as far as their impartial bias, and that this assessment doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be published, obviously, and that it shouldn't be held as evidence towards disciplinary action of the officer. It's just for them to get an idea of where they are before embarking on whatever impartial bias training is offered. And then maybe they can take it afterwards to see how they improved, right? So it's just really like a self-guide, a self-assessment prior to taking an impartial bias training. And some of the research that I found was that impartial bias training is great. You know, officers are more aware of things after their impartial bias training, but that pretty much the behavior still doesn't match what was learned or taught in this impartial bias training. So in order to really drive home what's being taught in these impartial bias trainings, that a behavioral training and morale improvement course also be implemented. And that they be given, I recommended some organizations as well. And then improve training for hired employees. So all employees, we recommend have ongoing e-learning courses or exercises. Consider them as continuing education credits. You know, in medicine, in real estate, every couple of years, you have to sort of like take, you know, courses to not recertify, but to, you know, keep up with your education, right? Like keep up with what's happening. And I think officers should do the same. Vinny touched on enhancing roll call training, providing officers with legal updates. So these are all things for hired employees. And then I continue with some minor things for that kind of go by level or tier. So if you're a new employee, if you're a junior employee, if you're a mid-level, if you're senior, that these things apply. And that's about it.
Awesome. Any thoughts, feedback, things you love?
I loved it. I think it's great. The only recommendation that I would possibly have is that as soon as the officers come on, that you have this implicit bias training. I'm familiar with the test. I'm a DEI, DE&I officer, so I'm familiar with this. And this has to be done right away, because if you get individuals in the department who already have a bias, it's going to be difficult to retrain them. That's my opinion. That's my opinion alone. And I know, I believe Vinny had mentioned the testing. People often say, well, you know what, certain people, they can't pass these tests. As such, they can't be on this department. No, you teach people how to take a test. It has nothing to do with certain individuals being smarter than others. Some people are just better at test taking. And if you give the individuals an opportunity early on and you train them on how to take this test, then they can become members. And then if you educate them on this implicit bias in all areas, not just a video, but people actually coming in and doing some training. If you force people to do something, they're not going to want to do it, and they're not going to be receptive. So I believe it has to be done in such a way that they'll want to learn. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy, you have a hand up?
Yeah, I agree with the exam. First of all, trying to encourage young people of color to become police officers is a huge challenge. And with the Guardians, we're doing, you know, we're really trying hard to get more people of color to take the police test. Secondly, they have to get a score high enough to get hired. So we've been working with different police commissioners, and I'm definitely going to reach out to Commissioner Scott about setting up some training classes for people of color or people who, you know, can't afford to, or, you know, most likely would not be paying for courses in taking a police exam. I know Khan Academy has training for other things. And we're trying to see about getting Khan Academy to teach the police exam to selected students. Also, PTS, Police Tutorial Services, they teach like the sergeant's exam review, the lieutenant's exam review. We're talking to them about possibly teaching an entry level training for the police exam. So that's something that the commissioners can consider. Can consider training opportunities for people to prepare for taking a police test. Like I said, I'm working with the Guardians, with different commissioners, and not just in Westchester, but at a national level, to because these places like the Khan Academy will not just teach one department. They're not going to come here and just teach Mount Vernon. They're too big to spend the resources to put a class together or a training module together for one city. But with the Guardians, if we have the entire East Coast United States saying, hey, we want a training module for the police exam, can you help us out? It may happen. So that might be just something to consider to help people take the test and pass it. But the main thing is getting people to want to take the test.
I love the idea about the implicit bias, but I also love it in a sense, in the context of Mount Vernon and the rest of Westchester County, because when we went to the police academy, one of the things that we learned was that the training at Mount Vernon Police Academy is one that Westchester wish they had. I mean, they depend on our training. So if you could put implicit bias into our training, you're not only just helping Mount Vernon, you have a potential, because I know Dave Clark is a part of the county reform commission as well. And I know he was saying that they wanted to do some things that was similar to what he was doing here in Mount Vernon. If you put implicit bias training into that, not just for Mount Vernon, it could have the potential to affect a lot of police officers that ultimately end up going to other places in Westchester community. So I like that idea.
Hey, Coach, but how do you get them to use the training? That's the question. A lot of them have the training and they don't use the training.
So that's what some of my research had indicated, that they have the training and they have this level of awareness, but it's sometimes not utilized. So that's where my suggestion of a behavioral training and morale improvement training would come in, so that they sort of work together or to complement each other. So it's one thing to have the awareness, but then it's another thing to actually, do something
to execute it. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, this is a reform commission. And so I'm sure that we will come up with a reform that will answer that question.
Because at the New York City, at the New York City DOE, I got implicit bias training from a woman who was Anglo, and she asked, "What biases do you have?" And I said, "The first one that I have is that I can't believe I'm in a bias training with an Anglo woman who's about to teach me." So I guess I showed my own bias. Go figure.
Yeah, but I agree. I agree with everything you're saying. But this is a reform committee. So if we come up with a reform towards that could be inserted into that training.
Well, I think that's why the recruitment aspect of it becomes so important, because we can put all these things into effect, but if we're not hiring the right person for the job, then it's like goes in one ear out the other. Especially when you start talking about training, when a lot of these officers have the mentality when they have their training days that they're not getting paid, when technically they are getting paid. These are days that they owe the city, but just because it happens to be on their day off, they look at it as, you got me coming in here on my day off and now I'm doing training. So yeah, some guys, you're just not going to get that full attention. But that's why it's so important to go towards, recruiting and making sure we're hiring the right people. And sometimes we're handcuffed because of, just like the situation we have now where civil service wasn't funded. So now we don't have any Mount Vernon residents on a list or something like that we're choosing from, and I don't know when they're going to get back to having a list where and that's not saying every Mount Vernon resident is perfect for the job, but at least you're going in the right direction, or you're in the right direction. But that's very important. Somebody had a question?
Yeah, that was me. I'm sorry, I couldn't raise my hand because I'm actually on the road. I was hoping that these trainings were being discussed to be implemented like at the academy level, going in, rather than relying on the officers to get these trainings, you know, at a later date or from their field training officer. Like if these trainings could somehow be implemented at the academy, then it would ensure all the officers having this training and having a better understanding as to how to go about certain things and deal with certain issues, because they will have definitely had the training.
The cheapest way to do that, because training is very expensive, is to turnkey it within the department. So if you get like 2 or 3 guys that really effectively use the training and they're really sharp, you can have them turnkey it and train your newbies. So even if they don't get the official, you know, training, it at least gets them up to speed. That's the first thing. The second thing is the Adopt a Cop program, I think, is a pretty good idea. I mean, besides the fact that it's my idea, I think it's a really good idea.
Well, that name already exists for a program that I actually participated in the 90s.
So I stole somebody's name?
No,
I'm still
no,
going to take credit for it.
You just stole the name. It's actually a program that was created by one of our community affairs officers, where a school adopted a police officer. This was before school resource officers and stuff like that. And it was actually voluntary. You didn't get any pay for it or nothing. And the officer is just adopted by the school, and you just become part of the school. You go there on your days off and you interact, and, you know, you're not in uniform, and you just, you know, that was just something we had did in the 90s that I actually.
I was talking
what
about
you were
handling,
talking about. Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Handling these startup costs. If it costs, you know, we have, you know, residents on the, especially on the in certain sections of the city that have pretty deep pockets. You know, Mount Vernon businesses donate, you know, $3 grand, $4 grand. I think it was like $5 grand for all the weapons and all the uniforms and all that stuff or what have you. Have it donated, and then have the officer's picture and some type of care package put together to thank the resident or thank the business for adopting that cop. And you can make your parameters in terms of Mount Vernon residency and your let's say make it a 4-year commitment as in return of the startup costs, because the startup costs are huge, especially when it comes to minority candidates. The minority candidates are gonna be set even further back if they have to come up with $5 grand, you know, in the midst of trying to find a job.
All right, hello everyone. So I wanted to just comment. I've been trying to listen to everyone's comments just to get a real good feel of everything. And I am, one, impressed by everyone's research and work to kind of get to this part. I think there's been a lot of work done. I am, however, struggling because there are a lot of things that were said that, one, are either already being done or we are about to launch. And I'm wondering how this works when some things, and also the other pieces, there are some initiatives that there's a key component of how is it going to be funded and how can we do that. And so I'm concerned about us putting together recommendations that we will not be able to implement. And so Vinny mentioned some really important things around civil service and the way the exams are set up. And these are real issues we need to address. The attorney Wagstaff sent an email out earlier today about the union contract. I also think that's also another component now at this late stage we haven't even addressed, and how that impacts every single thing that was addressed on this call today. And I think we need to be honest about what those limitations are, because we're putting recommendations together that are this detailed. Then what happens when we're not able to do one piece of it? We're not in compliance. And so we've done all this work to not be able to implement on these things because there are these key components that they will be work in progress that we won't be able to complete. So I'm concerned about that, right? So there are a few things, and I just want to bring those up around ABLE, Georgetown University and ABLE. We are working with them to actually incorporate that. There was a train the trainer component that they had offered a while back before I even joined the department. and our detective Clark had reached out. They never got back to him. I then got involved. And so now we're actually going to have it where they will be doing the ABLE training our training staff. We have officers in our training unit so that they can actually deliver the bystander intervention training. That's one component. That's something that we just do. It's stuff that is on our list of things that we're doing every day. So to make that a recommendation, I would rather there be something broader that encompasses all of those type trainings, not very specifically naming things, because once we've accomplished the ABLE training, then what? There's like all this other stuff inside of that we can actually continue to do. Like make it so it's continuous, not just one thing. When we accomplish it, then it's checked. But how do you broaden that category to talk about it so that we can continue to, like, this would be recommendations that we could keep looking back 5, 6, 7 years from now and say, okay, yes, now how can we use those recommendations to do things. If we speak very specifically about things, unfortunately, many of these things we are doing already. Or before this report is done, we're actually going to put out a lot of this stuff. So now your report.
So DC Lackard, if I may on this one, did the police department provide the commission ever, because this is a constant, right? Oh, we're already doing this. Did the police department ever provide the commission with a written detailed list of the programs that they're actually doing?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that we're doing.
No. Did we ever get a written list of that?
I believe.
No, right? Is it published anywhere? So if not, I'm putting it squarely on the police department, right? Because if they are doing stuff and we are called as a commission and they're not communicating to us in writing and in detail of what is already being done, I can't read their minds. We had 2 months or 3 months for them to do that by now. Right? They have not been very forthcoming and proactive with information. So if that blows up, it's on them, right? It's like if they're not sharing what they're already doing, I can't read their minds.
Well, it's not going to be on us. It's going to be on the commission, because now we would have done all this work and almost all of the recommendations that in some areas would have been accomplished. And then essentially by you limiting it by saying, do this particular thing, when we do that particular thing and when we are already we're in pursuit of that one thing, when it's accomplished, there's nothing else to be done.
Well, then please, I would recommend, so we don't have that situation, because we can't read their minds, right? I mean, how are we supposed to do that without information? So if we can get ASAP, a written, comprehensive, detailed list of all the initiatives that are already taking place in that regard, especially you've seen it, that overlap with our recommendations, we can fine tune it. But in absence of information from the police department, that's a horribly hard thing to do for us.
Okay, I do that. And what we can do is we can look at all the 4 and we can actually respond to every single piece to tell you where we are with that. Because when you ask these very long laundry list of things that we're currently working on, I think that does put us at a disadvantage. It also is not productive for us to go into the weeds on this. I don't think that's what this commission was designed to do. It was to put these very broad parameters in place to give us guidance, not to, once the guidance is done, we can say check. Because in essence, some of these divisions and cities that have been doing that have been picking very easy things to put on their list to say, yes, we've done that. And then once they do it, it's over. So I don't want to, I don't want to get into this on that part, other than make the point that as we are making recommendations, to be as broad as we can in the cover section, and then the middle piece, allow that implementation, leave that up to the department or for us to negotiate as it goes, but not speak specifically to what needs to get done. Improve, if we go back into the trainings, I think there was stuff that was like improve community relations. Okay, and then give some examples in training and all that. But to actually spell out the specific piece, like we're doing crisis intervention training. We have crisis intertrain officers. We're doing officer wellness. I've launched an MVPD Well officer wellness campaign. I have 16 clinicians that support the Mount Vernon police officers. We have post-crisis wellness checks. We actually do the whole 8 dimensions of health and wellness. Then so we look at financial wellness, spiritual wellness, occupational, we do physical. We have an entire component that looks at linking these officers to services in the community based on what they need. They're going through divorce, they're going through financial, they're considering bankruptcy, they're looking at buying a home. These are services that we offer internally. That's part of the MVPD wellness. We also have officers that are having challenges. We do what we can to link them to clinicians in real time. Those clinicians are then able to support them and give them what they need. That then reports back to us. We talk about what their needs are and how we can better support them. That is the MVPD Officer Wellness Program that we're doing. Has nothing to do with the wellness that we're doing in the community. These are things that we have an EAP program. Okay, so now David wants to know the data on how effective strategies that we just launched. Do you know that I just been working at the department for months, right? You know that so the fact that I was able to actually implement it is huge.
Yes, indeed. And let me give credit where it's due. You're doing an awesome job. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So don't get defensive, please. I'm just saying that in terms of the process. It's kind of hard not
to, because, you know, it's a constant, I feel like there needs to be, there are so many issues that everyone is focused on the stuff that happens at the department level. Before we even get there, if we don't address the bigger issues as to will these officers do training, will they do the things that you're saying because it's not part of a contract or what they have to do?
I get it.
None of this will matter. And okay. Vinny, so Vinny, I'm surprised as to how you haven't spoken to that. Have you mentioned how important that is? We won't get out the gate if there's opposition to that.
DC Lackett, I'm just simply saying that you may be working very, very hard. It's the thing that I'm seeing is an issue with the process. Your process isn't really efficient, and you're working very, very hard, but you're not working very, very effectively. So when you implement something, I mean, again, it's just feedback. It's just feedback.
I just think the wording is a little wrong right now. I just think the wording. I'm sorry, it's just a little wrong.
Okay, so let me retrace.
Rephrase it. Thank you.
Let me rephrase. Thank you. No problem. So when you implement something, in my opinion, there's other ways to do it. So let me first say that there's other ways to do it besides this. When you implement something, it should be implemented with measurable goals. And those measurable goals, you should have another checkpoint or what have you. So if the gentleman's saying, well, what is the status of this, or what's the next checkpoint, it may not have the seeds may not have bared fruit yet, but we're just trying to get on the same page as to what is the process from seed to fruit. That's all we're asking. So if there's stuff that's in the midst and in the workings and is starting to grow and sprout, okay, just let us know what's growing and what's sprouting or what have you, even though we know it may not bear fruit right now. Was that a better way of saying it?
Can I piggyback off of that, David, please?
Go
ahead. So as Axel pointed out, and as you know, a lot of what's being said here, there are a lot of things that are in the works, but if we're not privy to that, I think that it's fair game to still make a recommendation for it. And if it is happening, that it is fair game for us to acknowledge it and say that it can continue to happen. I don't know if DC Lackard, you have more specific examples of the items that you felt were too specific and that you suggest that we broaden, so that my committee and other committees can take a better look. But I think, and all of this is still in the works, but I think that at least with the outline that I provided, you know, there are some general things, but I thought the idea was to make more specific, more refined recommendations, because that's what was missing. And that's, you know, the information, again, that we weren't privy to.
Right.
I don't think
so. And okay. I want to say to you in the recommendations that have come out. And I said before, I think they're very strong recommendations. They seem to be redundant with a lot of the things that we are already doing. But I think there's also a lot of challenges of resourcing. Pardon me, Dwayne?
Well, I just want to bring everybody back to the very first meeting that we had over at the library. And I asked the question of Commissioner Scott, could you please give the commission anything that you are currently doing so that we won't have to have redundancy, so that we wouldn't have this conversation right now. Right. It's the reason we're having this conversation because we weren't provided it. And that's the, I mean, you know, we're really,
and not only that, Coach,
we're really into the I'm sorry, real quickly, Anika, I know we're really far into this now, but what was the most disappointing part of that is that emails after that from several people have been trying to get this information, and we only got little drips and drabs. So yes, I agree with you that, you know, getting into the weeds like we have may be problematic given what you guys have already done, but we didn't know what you already done.
Right. And I want to also say that, and I'm going to defend my commissioner, because, you know, you've got to be in it to know how challenging this is, what we're dealing with. You know, when we came in, both myself and Deputy Commissioner Morales, we knew that there were challenges behind the wall and within the department, but it's not until you get in it and you think you have a suggestion. Many of the suggestions that you have, that when you go to start it, you realize, oh, well, you can't because that bill isn't paid or that program is in place, but we're not able to do that. Or we have this software, but we don't have that particular license to allow us to extract the data that we think is easy, that we have in a system. Or we're not putting information in a certain way. So now we have to go back and train our officers to do it that way. So what we had to do was, where we thought we were at 5, we're literally going back to like 1 and saying, okay, what can you do, DC Morales, on a training? How can we break up the policies? We're literally going back to square 1 to make sure that we can undo this. And we're all talking about 6 months time, and the commissioner has one year time ahead of us. And then you have COVID in front of that. So I'm defending and saying, I understand that, you know, and we are defensive. I can see it now. Like when I look at the dynamics, we get defensive because when we come in, we cannot get a day. I mean, I feel like this group is relentless, and I know that it's not negative. I know that, I mean, Axel, Mary, Dwayne, you know, are on a group that I asked to sit on a committee, right? So I want that advocacy, but understanding that when we go to work every day, we think things are going to work out a certain way until we find out we can't do something that we need to. We have to work around. So I've been leveraging resources just to get stuff done. Amy and I have a relationship because her and I tried to figure out how could we deal with the wellness component that we have in the department as well as in the community, because we're picking up people that are homeless. We're running calls, EDP calls. We're spending a lot of resources. I have tried to figure out how to advocate with, there are 42 people who sit on Behavioral Health Advisory Council with me. There are 12 individuals who sit on a Reentry Advisory Council with me. These are people who I ask for their brain trust to help me get through these issues that we have all talked about. So it is not that we're not doing things. It's just that there's no check to be cut to get some of this stuff done. So because there's no check, in absence of getting funding for it, I have to find a way to still do it. So now I'm leveraging existing resources to do that. And guess what? You can't do that until certain things get legislated, you get approval from certain people. So I'm going back to say it is a bit of a challenge because most of the things that are being, that you're saying, are being done. And then I also feel that it's very difficult. I come on, who is that? Please, no background. I feel it's very difficult when I come onto these meetings and I'm trying to, like, I gave up my slot last week, and Danielle will attest to that, because this group was concerned about meeting with the rank and file. I then gave up my slot to talk about all of the wellness stuff that I've been doing within the department around training, around mental health, around reform, police reform, because everyone wanted to talk to the rank and file. So I brought on Sergeant Jean Jerome and Lieutenant Master Giorgio to talk about those issues. I gave up my slot because I felt like you needed to hear that. The week before that, I brought on DC Morales to address the issues that you have. Why? Is because we're literally, as you're talking about developing the policies, we write stuff down and we realize, well, we have to kind of have like a current policy and then a policy when things are at full capacity. Because during COVID and with no resources and funding, we have to do things differently just to be able to get our job done. And it's very challenging. Can
I jump in, guys? I'm sorry. So I think, you know, I kind of want to just like reset the room, right? Because I think we're getting a little off track from where we started, and I want to be able to keep moving forward, right? So I think I hope no one's saying that we don't think DC Lackard and DC Morales is doing, not doing anything on their end, right? I don't think that's the impression at all. What I think what they're saying is we need, just like they want information on what's currently going on so that we can refine some of these things and edit it out. I hear you about not being too detailed. I think there's a happy medium. We can add some, have the recommendations, have examples of what else, and also, broaden it out. I also think that one of the recommendations can be a committee that can continue with these kind of recommendations and some implementation. Right, so I kind of want to reset the room and use our time. We have 35 minutes left. We still have a subgroup to present some ideas. So I don't want us to go too far down. I get it, DC Lackard. You're doing a ton of work over there, and it's difficult for you to provide some of the detail. But as much as you can provide, I think would be helpful for the committee. Am I on track with that?
Yes, but I also think that no matter what you provide and whatever I provide you, if you do not address the real issues that will allow us to see change, all of this is in vain. You cannot make officers do certain things. Everything has to be negotiated. And even if you do, how are you paying for that? You have us at a deficit right now where we're considering furloughs and layoffs because we don't have, and we worked out stuff with a budget, but we are constrained to overtime. I have to figure out how can we do community service and working in the community without offering overtime or comp time, because officers will not do that. Now, we are trying to create a new culture, and all of this is around changing culture. We are trying to create a new culture so that it is the inside out. When new officers know in, they know that there's to protect what they learned just coming out of the academy, and then there is to serve. You're serving your community, and that should not be something that you have to be compensated for. But that's a problem because that has to be learned. You have officers that I honestly cannot do it unless I have money at the table for overtime or I have comp time. Vinny, am I right or am I wrong?
You're right.
So now what we're talking about is something that's very real. All of this sounds wonderful. It is beautiful. It is very euphoric. But the problem is, if you want to put a recommendation that has to be implemented, you have to help me get around these issues that we can't get around unless there is a larger issue. This is an amazing commission. Use the power of this commission to do the things that I can't do, that Commissioner Scott can't do, and Deputy Commissioner Morales can't do. You guys are telling us stuff that we are already doing or that we can do. Help us with the stuff we can't do. I love the cost analysis on the benefits. How can we bring up the numbers so that we can make sure our officers are getting paid? That's amazing. If you want to look at contract issues, that's another thing. But those are the really, really big items that will, if we can't fix this, it will stop. We need money. We need equipment. We don't have it. We have
with all due
we
respect,
have
that is not our position, right? We're not going to fix the funding problem at City Hall. We're not going to fix the controller madness at City Hall. We're not going to fix the budget. We're going to give out our recommendations and we're going to hand it over to the City Council and forces there be, and then it will be up to them to figure that portion out, right? You're putting something on the commission that, in my opinion, is simply not our responsibility.
But the end result is something that has to be accomplished. So if in essence, what you're saying is that just like the CCRB has been sitting for 3 years, and we've talked about this, Axel, why is the CCRB not up and running? It got approved by the City Council and it wasn't funded by the Board of Estimates, and it didn't go anywhere. So are we talking about everyone spending all of this time on this commission, doing this really hard work and coming up with amazing recommendations, to now it just get lost in vain because for years we can't figure out what it takes to get over the barriers? That is what I am challenging this commission to do. Don't tell me what we already know. Let's figure out the big issues that will stop this dead in its tracks if we don't deal with it.
By the way, DC Lackard, I'd just like to say, can I just say this? Thank you for your hard work. Appreciate that. You know me extremely well. You know I like to do things a certain way. I did not know that the specific recommendations that we gave were not good. Had I known that, then things would have gone a certain way. So maybe now what we can do, just try to revamp things, because at the end of the day, all of us are giving our time just as you are. And I have to admit, I am somewhat frustrated because we did put our time into this. And now to be told, well, certain things are in place. Can you just give us a breakdown? Can you send me an email tomorrow, like my outline? If certain things are already in place, then I will delete it. It doesn't need to be there. if certain things are already in place, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, because honestly, in other jurisdictions, these smaller towns and villages, it hasn't been like this. It has not been like this.
Can I just say something real quick? I'm not trying to interrupt you, but a lot of these recommendations that are being made, and I've said it from day one, are a lot of the things that the department is already doing. But what about when this administration is no longer part of Mount Vernon, and there is no baseline on the continuum of what you guys are putting in place? In other words, training. Are those trainings becoming policy where it says that the Mount Vernon Police Department must do this on an annual basis, or this and that? Because if it's not, then it's something that I think is going to have to be in our recommendations, because that's going to have to get looked back on. Okay, in 2021, there's the police reform recommendations, and this is what we were supposed to go by, but we haven't been doing them. So if you could just answer to that, if it's going to be policy, or is it just...
You and I talked about that, Vinny, and I said, you're right, that the policy needs to be changed, which is why we're at that point where we're going to the manual. We're not just saying this is what we're doing. We're going to the manual. We're changing things from the ground up. And you can't just put a policy out there and then say, that's it, that's the order. We're really taking the time to change it internally and then train it. So it's not a tomorrow thing. And I'm happy that you said that. And we've been saying all along, many of these things we are already doing. It's changing the policies. And I don't think much has to be changed other than the language of how we're putting these policies in and what our recommendations are. I will go ahead and I'll work with my commissioner and my deputy commissioner and our chief to give a response to each one in a very cohesive format to each report, so you can see what we're doing. I think that's fair. It's not fair to ask me or one or two particular people to give all of this information when a lot of it is work in progress. It is a lot of information to consume. Like this commission needs like a full-time person to get the information and then to kind of take the information back. Because I'm taking information back when we get off this phone. This isn't this call. This isn't just a one-way thing. It's trying to say, okay, this came up, how can we do that? And I'm going to DC Morales and saying, this is what they're doing. And he sent me the whole amendment to the use of force that was edited back in July, then back in December. So things that you are concerned about, we are working on. It's maybe sitting somewhere in a computer and not printed. And yes, you are right. It may not be fair that we're doing it, but we're doing this all in real time. This is real time for us. So Danielle, I will take the information and respond to it, and I can get it back. We can work on it tomorrow and we can push it back out to this commission. If you want it, we can get it to everyone maybe by Monday. Is that enough time, or do you think you need it before then?
Hey, Danielle, I make a recommendation, since you have all the Google Docs and stuff on that line. Anyway, we can just combine some of the things. A lot of it is redundant when you go from different thing to thing, and then that way just put it in a basic list so we can get it to DC LACA and get that. Maybe that'll make it more expedient. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. We have been combining. We haven't combined. Axel just sent over some transparency stuff, so we haven't put that in the main document. We haven't put in the recruitment and retention, because that was just sent over today as well. So I can work to combine that so it's one document. I'll try to get it done by tomorrow, DC LACA, so that you have as much time as you need. And yeah, but everything else is consolidated in that one main report, and it's titled, let me see exactly what it's titled. And I'll send the link after this. It's titled Mount Vernon Police Reform Commission Report. It's in the Google Drive document. So I've consolidated what we had, and I plan on adding the other two, in.
Okay. So I know I received Axel's police transparency report, and even so as an update, we were kind of stalled on the website plan, and management services has come back to us and put us back on where they're negotiating a deal with the vendor that will do the entire city's website, and the police department is included in that. And so when Axel sent that over, what I did was prepared his portion of it for us to push back out, because they want to meet with myself and the commissioner about what we'd like to see in the website. And so those recommendations will be exactly shared with them about these are the things that we would like to see. They look very similar to what we've put, but we can put it directly as it is, proposed in the police transparency piece. I've been reviewing all of them and sharing them with the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, and they have feedback and comments. So we can just do it. It just needs to be one concise document. And Danielle, when you and I spoke last night, I know that you were looking to tweak it, but some of them are redundant and they overlap. So we just need to decide which one we're going to go with, and then I can give comments on them, or we all can give comments, and then we can move from there.
So yeah, the document, the Mount Vernon Police Reform Commission report we consolidated it. We didn't, change language or anything like that, but it's consolidated. So the website, all the website things are under bullet point 7. So I can go in and add Axel's comments as well to the document so that, you can find all those things in one place.
Okay.
I have one quick question, Dwayne, if you would let me.
Go ahead.
Because we were wondering, and that's just a sheer procedural thing, right? So as far as I understand it, because we're getting closer to that, all of that stuff is hopefully going to be in a bigger and better coherent report, right? That goes to the City Council and Board of Estimates and Contracts. So what happens if the City Council, the Board of Estimates and Contracts, or the mayor looks at this and is like, no, we don't agree with this, right? What's the process? Does it come back to us? What if we are like, well, that's too bad for you, but that's what we want, right? I was just wondering what the mechanism is.
City Council has to approve a plan. So we either pull the plan out or we change it to satisfy them. And if we don't have a plan approved by April 1, the governor has the right to put an independent monitor here in Mount Vernon until we get our plan approved.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else that is work in progress or status, like stuff that is brand new this administration that you're working on that it would step on the toes for us to reinvent the wheel? Because I think that would have alleviated some of the frustration, because it may be very effective. And it's not I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, you're trying this, but I have a better way to do it, or we have a better way to do it. No way, no how. Right. Just what else is from square one as opposed to stuff that's in square 5, because in a couple of the meetings you guys have said we're basically building it from the ground floor. We had to start all over again. So when you say things like we're at square one, we're starting all over again, then nobody here is under the premise that like literally anything in terms of groundwork has been laid. So that's a tough one. And that's why I said repeatedly, let's stop talking about previous administrations or what you guys been, bogged down with. We've accepted the fact that you guys have been put in a crappy situation. It's in the past. Let's get over it and move on with what you got. And the last point that I'll make, is there any parameters that we need to be aware of in terms of restrictions so that people don't, in your what you refer to as this panacea that some of the ideas have had, is there anything that is just a parameter that we have to be aware of so we don't suggest something that is unrealistic? Can we get those parameters down?
So I hate to say when I kind of say, oh, we're doing that, it's because when you ask a specific question, anything I see in a course of business that's not right, I usually change it. It's not a question. It's not a, what do we do? I hear something, it doesn't look right. I ask questions, and I make people feel very uncomfortable around the department because I'm going around asking questions because I'm like trying to find a solution in that moment. So for example, for the youth part, we created this. So Detective Dave Clark has been doing a lot of work with youth over the years. We had a youth academy. We've done stuff, a youth summer academy, and then that stopped for a variety of reasons, based on funding, support, and all that. So we created the youth, and I'm actually creating sort of a unit of officers that are in this space because we cannot have a CPU. The CPU officers have to get rolled back into patrol. I'm trying to now make it so that it's a part of what officers do, but that it's not a dedicated function. So for our youth, we have, like, for example, we had these kids that were robbing kids, sticking up kids, and it was a ring of patterns in the community. I am committed to diversion. So there's a few things on diversion that we're doing. Joanne Dunn is doing a youth part. She's working with the judges to do a youth part. I'm a part of that with her. I'm working with our ADAs around how do we look to get, how do we have people coming in and we divert them to the right resources? I've had situations where we've diverted a crisis just because we were able to bring mental health support in either from guidance center or another provider. Everything is around diversion. That's not something that we write. We're seeing how it works and what doesn't work and what we can actually get done, but we're literally doing this in real time. So there's a youth piece, a youth that got in trouble. And I said, well, we have a youth council, a youth advisory and leadership council that we just started in December. They're to advise us. They're also to let us know what their concerns are, just like you, from the youth perspective. We're also going to help them be leaders. And so we had different individuals, even from this group, recommend people who they thought would be great. But those are people who are already in programming. They are prone for leadership. They're athletes. They're involved in other institutional type programs. That's great. What happens to the kid that doesn't want to do that? What happens to the kid that doesn't have someone at home who feels like he'd rather go stick up somebody to figure out how to eat? That's something that we don't really speak to in what we do, but we see it at the police department every day. I'm looking at these young kids, 12 and 13 years old. They're aimless. And I'm like, well, I can't put them in the advisory council. What can I do? Guess what? In real time, and I think Dwayne knows it because I was supposed to talk to him and I ended up sitting at the council at the precinct till 1 a.m, figuring out what do we do when we have this happen? What do we have now? We now have a small cadre of youth that they fall into that. They come internal. They're come to us from either the youth bureau. Vinny, you would know this, youth bureau or SROs. If someone knows of it, a kid that's having a problem, and we're working with them. We're advocating with the family court to let them know what we're doing. They're going to be coming to the police department because if they're in a police department, they're not in someone's back window and they're not robbing someone. Our officers are mentoring those young kids and we are trying to find resources. We don't have resources, so we have to build it, track the data, and then show it to say, this is why we need more money to move forward, because none of the stuff that we're doing exists, but we have to create a framework for doing it. So that is something that if you ask me, no, we would only have the Youth Advisory and Leadership Council, but with those kids sitting there, I was like, what are we doing? We have to do something for them. Guess what? The parents show up and they are like, can I come? They're excited because they need the help. We have to be very responsive and agile. And if we create recommendations that tighten us down, we're not able to do that. Now,
understood. And you're building the plane as you're flying it, which is a very scary thing.
That's exactly what it is.
All we're saying is that as you're building it, please write down how you built it so we can support you. And if you need another wing, we can help. That's literally what this whole entire conversation is.
I appreciate that perspective, David. I appreciate that than the position that nothing is being done and that we're not doing anything. And I think that is where the defensiveness comes from. I think I've been very open-minded. My commissioner maybe has not appeared to be that open-minded, but it's because we're doing stuff that has not been done. And it's you and prior administrations have not done that. And I think you guys are all frustrated with prior administrations, but you're taking it out on us and not giving us enough time to do the work. In my opinion, you're taking it out on me. Like you're gaslighting me every time I come to a meeting. And it's me that I'm
honestly, DC Lacker, it's not, I think everybody would agree. We're not trying to gaslight you. But unfortunately, like you said, you guys have come into a situation that has already been happening. Yes.
So be our partner to help us get out of it.
But if I may, you're going to also have to understand that there's going to be things that we are going to propose that may not fall right along the line of helping what you believe is helping you.
But if
I may. And the idea, when you look at what the governor has said about what the police reform is supposed to be, it's supposed to be something about change. It's not always going to be about, okay, well, what we can do. And granted, I know you got a lot, and we'll talk, but I know you got a lot. But for sitting from my side, as much as I've been to the police academy, and I'm now so supportive of the police officers, but I see things that I know that we're going to disagree about. And I don't want it to be a point where, okay, let's help you get this, but then those things that we may be a little more controversial to you, we're not going to deal with because you're so caught up on these things.
No, but what I think all of you need to realize is that by me being in this position, I essentially am part of the reform. The fact that they hired someone like me for this role is a huge piece on the department side. That is a risk. Trust me, I am a risk when I come to work every day, because I am very much speaking along the lines of what this entire commission is talking about. And so what you're saying, there's nothing really that you say that I disagree with. It is the fact that now I am on the other side and I see how hard it is to implement these things, and that I want us to get to that end goal, but let's be realistic about what we're doing. And so I don't really disagree with this commission, but I think there's this position, one, that I'm a cop now that I'm being paid by the police department, but I am a civilian, and I am literally, I mean, I know many of you because I've been on that other side. 6 months ago, I was working with many people on that side. That hasn't changed my perspective just because now I work in the department. So, I mean, like the opposition is pretty real on this group, and we could accomplish so many more things, but think of it not as if I don't agree with you. My goal is, how do we get the things accomplished that this group wants to do? And many of the things that are being said, if they're not already in progress, they are really not possible given the parameters that we have. So I want to try to address those parameters so that we can do all these great things that we've talked about, because we're going to get stuck in the weeds. And a lot of these recommendations are not going to happen. And people are going to say, oh, see, now even the whole commission couldn't do anything.
Well, let's get right to the big elephant in the room, civilian oversight.
Okay.
I mean, that will probably be the one big thing that will probably be that wedge issue in terms of that will not go in that category of what you're doing, well, what you're asking for us to help you with. And I have a concern about that, because I believe in there should be some kind of civilian oversight here. But what I'm hearing, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, that maybe so many things are so wrong that maybe we can't even get to this, yet we have a governor that's telling us change is hard, but he wants it done.
No, so I think you and I we've talked at length about a CCRB. I think a CCRB is great. I think it works. I know I went out because I was sick, and I came back and there was a whole civilian police commission, and I couldn't understand the logic of where it went from that while I was out and what the conversation was. So I've been playing catch up and trying to understand the reason why a civilian police commission is needed on top of a CCRB, which I believe there's another layer of an advisory board inside of that. And I see the reference, and I looked at what was out there. And I just don't understand how, I mean, I have some stuff. Actually, Danielle, can you help me share? Can you help me share my screen?
You're a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay.
Share. Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand the logic behind it, and walk me through this.
Let me enlighten you. It is actually a very, very, very short concept from the, like, not in detail, but from the overview, right? So a CCRB is a complaint review board.
Yes.
Right? Which means it would only address civilian complaints.
Yes.
And nothing else, right? So basically, that board would only cooperate or basically advise, or however you want to call it, with the police commission if there's trouble in paradise. That is not a good cooperation between a civilian body and a police department, right? Because it's antagonistic.
Wait,
because
you
only basically talk to each other when there are problems, right? So that's not a very good way to engage, right? And if you look at all the CCRBs that are having problems, it's because they're having antagonistic relationships with the police department. So maybe we thought, just from a very basic point of view, that it might be better that this is more like an ongoing partnership, right? Where you're not just convening to get from a civilian side with the police department if there is friction or somebody's complaining, but on a constant basis, so that the complaints are only part of it. That is the main
it's
thing.
consistent feedback.
I see that.
That is correct.
Okay.
And that is not just antagonistic, right? Because if you
Positive
only
feedback.
If you, well, but it's not just the content. Feedback is also to have a more productive and amicable relationship, right? Because if you're only engaging with people every single time they're on the defense, you're not going to get a good long-time relationship. So that was the most basic underlying thing. And the other thing is also that I think that, or like we thought, right, and Mary was very much on the forefront of that, that there are other things too that should be addressed on a constant basis, right, where the civilians should be should have some sort of input or at least cooperation. And that is the underlying idea. It's that simple, really.
Okay, so in that sound,
sorry, can I piggyback off of that and say
sure,
something?
go ahead, Anika.
Anika?
I'm here. Sorry, I'm just like talking from a few different devices. Sorry. And that the data from the survey also supports that, right? So there's data that supports that. I think it's like nearly 80% of Mount Vernon, or the people who responded, want to have involvement in their police department. And another 70+% that do want to have involvement in holding police officers accountable for misconduct. So that also speaks to what Ash was talking to. Not only do we want to hold them accountable for misconduct, but we want involvement in how the police service our community in general.
Okay, and I don't disagree with any of you in that. I do think the method is what I'm questioning. I have been on board with the CCRB. I think we can move the police department and people who are challenged about how it's worked. I think there's room for us to make some pretty some lenient decisions for CCRB, and I think we can play around with that, and that I thought we were all in agreement on. The CPC, number one, it's a whole nother body, and I don't get how that interfaces, and I was trying to find out how did it work and how was it successful in the models that Mary had talked about. And Mary had talked significantly around Middletown and in Portsmouth. So I went to look to see how it was made up. I think the main challenge that we have is those jurisdictions are smaller villages. So you have, in Mount Vernon, we have a police commissioner, a first deputy commissioner, myself, we're all actually civilian appointees. And then you have the police chief, and all of the divisions filter and roll up under the police chief. We have 67,000 people in the community, over 4.4 square miles. You see the demographics and you see the number of officers. Middletown, however, their highest level is their chief of police. So if you look up here where you see the police chief, you have a police commissioner, a first deputy, and a deputy commissioner. Middletown, they only have a chief of police. So essentially, what they have a civilian police commission because they don't have police commissioners. So yes, there is a need for it. The other challenge of it is Middletown has.
Excuse me when I can interrupt you, but that's a completely different dynamic, right? We are basically saying we are having a CCRB just with a wider scope. Versus
no, we're not. I'm trying
versus
to make
people who are working for the police department.
No,
I'm not questioning that you have the heart in the right place, but you work for the police department. That is not civilian oversight.
It's a fresh set of eyes.
That is, I'm trying. You are correct, but the reason why those civilian police commissions are successful in those areas is because they don't butt heads with anyone else. How is a civilian police commission going to interact with the actual police commissioners, which, may I remind you, are in the charter, which are that's a police commissioner, his role is in the charter. We are civilian appointees. All of what you are trying to create on the civilian side already exists. Now, I am not opposed to us looking at creating some civilian board, but a board of commissioners with the same exact responsibilities that police commissioners have seems redundant. I also don't see how bureaucratically you would handle that. How do you manage a civilian police commission with a police commissioner, a deputy commissioner, a first deputy commissioner, a police chief, a city council, a mayor, and actually a public safety committee on top of that city council. Where does the city council work? And in one of the jurisdictions, they actually have the civilian police commission inside of an auditor, which is under finance. It sits differently. It doesn't sit under city council. So when we're looking at the dynamics of what we're comparing it because those jurisdictions of 28,000, we're at 67, we're more than that, 28,000 and 21,000 members. It's basically like Mayberry needing the community to help them. That makes perfect sense. How do you tie in a complete commission with a civilian commission? Who does what? So now the civilians are going to appoint, hire, and fire, promote officers when by charter, that's what this police.
I gotta step in on this one.
You got it, Coach.
The whole idea of what we're doing wasn't saying that that everything we're saying was going to be automatically in. The idea, and back to my point about the first day of asking the commissioner to join us, where we can sit down and we can talk these things. We can structure it the way we want. The city council is going to do the exact same thing. They're going to take it. They're going to structure it. They may structure it and say, hey, guess what?
No, they're saying yay or nay. The city council is saying yay or nay.
Or they're going to say, well, according to the governor's thing, they have the ability to edit it and whatever, and then put it up for public viewing. But they will still have the ability to structure it in a way that's acceptable to the city council, police department, or not. So the idea that it has to be just this way is just simply not true.
But that's not how you've been pitching it. You've been pitching it of the framework of a civilian police commission. It says who the commissioners that actually put it together, and it's very outlined. This is not food for thought. I mean, if I said yes, okay, no pushback on it, it would be as it is.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
I think Mary, when Mary was putting it together, she said a numerous amount of times that this is just a recommendation. It can be changed. It can be changed. However, so it's not set in stone. She's just trying to lay some foundation so that it's easier to pick up and implement. So it wasn't like a set in stone thing from her, for sure.
There was actual discussions to get back to DC Lacker's point about the people that are already entrusted with this. We had a discussion about the police mindset versus just having other perspectives blended in. Does it have to be blended in on every single case or every issue? Absolutely not.
I agree.
When you go through that, if you go through that organization chart, everybody on that organization chart, with the exception of you, has a military police type background, and that is not conducive to what we are trying to accomplish by getting in a different perspective on occasion, blending in or what have you.
Okay, so now I have advisory councils that advise me on things all the time, and there are people on this group that are a part of those members. It's not one or two people, and people give thoughts and feedback all day that is integrated into what I actually develop. Why would this group not want to become an advisory council to the police department?
Because we want more than just an advice. Because if we just can give advice, doesn't necessarily mean it'll be implemented. And when you look at the governor's, again, when you look at the governor's instructions in the collaborative effort, the idea was to have a say, and that it was going to be a change in the current structure or the militaristic or whatever it is. So the idea of advice, which was really always there because you could always do it from a community blueprint, whatever. But this is something that would be done by the city council, done by the city and the electeds, that will give us some say. Does that mean we're going to do the same thing like a Detroit, where it's completely civilian control? No, that's not what we're suggesting.
Right, but you're saying the members of the sectors would be appointed by the community. How does the community appoint members of it? I don't understand that, unless that's an elected role.
With respect, That's a suggestion. We're not saying that this is going to automatically be.
So then let's work on the suggestions, because I don't, and I've said this from the beginning, I do not see how all of this is great in theory. How can you implement that? And who's the tiebreaker when there's a challenge?
One hand washes the other, and both hands washes the face. It takes two. Oh, wait.
But the current policy doesn't speak to that.
Perfectly though. If we were never given the parameters, we couldn't adjust it according to the parameters.
Yes.
You kept on saying day one, whether the restrictions, what's already in place to boost it up, and the restrictions, what limits it. And everything that we suggest has to be fluid, because we were never given the box of the parameters that we had to stay within. That is what Coach is saying. And he's dead on about this. So if we give a suggestion and we're told you can't do this because of a parameter, well, why didn't you just tell me the parameter from the beginning, and then we could sit there and hammer this thing out and have something concrete? Well, you can't possibly expect us to have something concrete when we're not given the restrictions and what's
because of that, you can say whatever. You can put whatever you want in your recommendation.
That's not true. That's that's counteractive.
Everyone, it's 59, right? So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's 8 o'clock. Is the close. I think this is a great conversation, and actually wanted to, Mary wasn't able to join. She did some of, a good portion of the research on this. So I think this is good for us to carry over to our next meeting, to finish this conversation around the CPC. What I would love to do to get everyone's input is take a poll, right? To see how everyone is feeling on the commission, because I know some are reluctant to speak up. So I think we should continue the conversation, have Mary involved in the conversation next week, have DC Lacker, also present the points that she was making tonight.
That I didn't get to finish, but sure.
Right, so that's why I want to give you the opportunity again next week.
I can't get nothing.
And but I think it's only fair that we have Mary here, because she did most of the research on it to defend the position and everything on that. So
can I say one thing?
Sure.
It's Anika. So
I'm
like, you're like, whose iPhone? The mindset that I had is that, yes, that there are parameters to get this done in dealing with reality and the current structures and resources, but that the work that we're doing requires a reimagining of what's currently happening, right? So, because what's been currently happening has not been working, so that there needs to be a lot of room for us to reimagine these structures in a way that is fitting for social justice, which is what enacted the governor's executive order in the first place. And lastly, I want everyone to really think about what the success of this commission really looks like. As individually or as a group, what are we really aiming to accomplish here, and what that looks like? That's all I want to say. Thank you.
All right, so let's reconvene next week, Wednesday, same time, 6 o'clock, same place. I'll send out the links for the Google Drive again, the 2 reports that were sent over today, the recruiting and retention, and the Jesus help me, transparency from Axel. I'll also send over the link to the 19 bullet points that we currently have, and DC Lackard, I'll try to consolidate them by tomorrow, so that you can go through review and get back to us regarding what's happening, what's currently being addressed. And any final thoughts or anything like that? Yes.
I just have one question real quick. All the recommendations have been submitted, correct?
Yes, recommendations have been submitted. What we do need people to do is start to work on fleshing some of them out. And you can do that directly in the Police Reform Commission report, right? So just don't delete anything. Just if you want to add some, so you guys have done significant work on them already. So we can add those in. Some of them may be complete, some of them may not be. So you can continue to work on them like that if you want to. For the ones that haven't been able to flesh them out, please feel free to jump in and flesh them out. Like there's some, one-liners in here, like number 8 and number 9 need some work. So jump in those and, flesh them out, please.
And are the co-chairs gonna gather all this information and make a final determination on what's in the final draft?
Yes, so ideally what we'll do is just draft for all the bullet points that are currently in there. And we'll come back before, you know, our meeting, February 24th. I think the 17th is when we were trying to get it complete. And we'll have just a discussion about what's in there. And, you know, we can vote if there's controversy on a particular recommendation, we can vote. And I think we move forward with what the majority of the commission believe is best.
Okay.
All right. Any final thoughts?
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you again. I'll send the recording out as well. And let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to send over anything that you need.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Good night, guys. Bye-bye.
Good night.